is my great pleasure to introduce the moderator of the next panel. By the way, I do weddings, bar mitzvahs, everything. It's very good. The moderator of the next panel is somebody who supported the early stage and growth stage venture capital fueled businesses for as long as I can remember. For the career where he was not only operational, hands-on in startups, and then went to support some of the most important banks, which then went on to support literally thousands of companies. Nobody's done a calculation of the prosperity that he's helped facilitate and create, but I think that's an exercise for an analyst somewhere. Please welcome Alex McCracken from JP Morgan. So, Alex has two speakers with him who are going to contribute to the discussions. Please sit where your picture goes. Alex, swap over. Thanks.
Yeah. In case you don't recognize which one's me, okay?
It is helpful. We've got Harlan Singh-Urowski from Citi Global Wealth, and Peter Oppenheim, who's the Chief Global Equity Strategist and Head of Macro Research from Goldman Sachs. Please welcome them to the stage.
So it's not often you get Citi, Goldman, and JP Morgan on a stage together talking collaboratively. We're normally at each other's throats and we all want to be number one, but these are important topics. So we actually collaborate a lot as institutions on co-investing in technologies. And we're seeing billions of venture capital being invested in the UK, Europe, and the US in AI, deep tech, quantum, cybersecurity, climate tech. So thought it would be great to interview Peter and Harlan around how they see the next decade panning out in terms of investment opportunities in those areas. So turning to Peter, you focus on global macro trends in your role. Could you tell the audience, are we in a bubble in tech?
Well, it's a good question, Alex, and hello and welcome to everyone from my side too. Yeah, I'm coming at this not as a technologist or someone who understands all of the technology, but someone who really looks at macroeconomic and financial market trends. Financial markets, of course, fund the growth in technology as well as other areas and often get overexcited about narratives. And we've seen it many times in history and indeed in waves over the last few years. And of course, the last big wave of financial excitement in technology really came in the late 1990s, which ended in a bubble in stock markets with technology companies being overvalued and falling very dramatically. But notably, despite that, technology as an industry in the stock market, pretty much everywhere, did become the leading engine of growth and the main outperformer in the decade or so that followed after that initial collapse. And so the question really is where we are in that kind of evolution or life cycle, and I would say we're still pretty early on in it. Now, it is notable, and as you well know, from a sort of financial market perspective, the focus on AI really exploded this year with the introduction of ChatGPT and the focus on large language models, the amazing performance of NVIDIA in its results earlier this year, which were much greater than analysts had expected. But really, AI has been with us for far longer. It's just that it's really captured the excitement of investors this year. And it's manifested itself predominantly in the biggest 7 incumbent dominant US technology companies performing extraordinarily well. They were up about 50% collectively through to around the summer of this year. They've come back a bit, but in value terms, they've increased about 35%. These are already massive companies. And bear in mind that's happened when the rest of the US equity market, if you strip out those, has been basically flat. So you've seen, tremendous performance but we shouldn't mix performance with valuation and expectation. You know, if you look at the valuation of those dominant companies, which at the moment is the main central focus of investors, they are considerably lower than the sort of valuations we were seeing for the dominant tech companies, for example, in the late 1990s. If you look at simple valuation measures, things like price-earnings ratios, they're about half what they were back then. And these companies are also generating huge cash flow and profitability. They have very strong balance sheets. They're relatively defensive. So I would say that from that perspective, we're not in a bubble. I think we're probably quite early on in the stages of the focus of investors on the opportunity set around AI. But I do think that over time, we'll get into this, I'm sure, the real focus of investors will begin to widen out from those dominant incumbent US companies to others that might be instrumental in this evolution.
Great news. We're not in a bubble. We're early on. So turning to Harlan, you focus on sustainability. How do you see tech enabling more sustainability in the world?
Sure. But first, quick question. How many people, when they hear the word sustainability, thought of climate first in the room? It's going to be pretty much everybody. And I think that, you know, first, let's just define what sustainability in the world means, right? Sustainability, obviously, there's a big focus on climate, but sustainability really is focused on, sustainable investing, I should say, is focused on investing in goods, services, and products that are designed to meet the needs as it relates to progress for people and planet. And so when we think about the role of technology, I think most of us have heard about renewable energy, solar, wind, and how technology has played a huge role in those kind of renewable energy spaces. We're also seeing, as it relates to climate, where some of the excitement is also quite boring, to be honest, right? It's what we call the picks and shovels. So technology around areas like insurance. Insurance is something probably most people don't want to talk about because it is, you know, a little stale. But insurance in the US, if you're following what's happening in the US, a lot of large insurers have pulled out of regions like California, like Florida, because climate risk is just not something that they can underwrite anymore. But technology has played a role now in modeling weather much more precisely than ever before. So you can actually model very closely the intensity, the duration of a storm that can allow insurers to better price insurance, that can allow airlines to better think about what flights they might need to cancel or delay, how much time they're spending on the tarmac, again, associated with reducing costs there. Another area that's really interesting and has been taking off in Europe is around energy efficiency. So things like heat pumps, which is moving hot air and cold air from one place to another to efficiently heat or cool a home or a building. And so these are areas that technology is really propelling. And then there are some really exciting kind of cool areas as well around carbon capture, so taking emissions out of the atmosphere, food and agriculture, so where GPS trackers and AI are playing a role in allowing farmers to very precisely irrigate, very precisely fertilize their land, monitor soil health to improve crop and improve yield. So both thinking about the risk side, right, and how to mitigate the risks that we're all facing from a sustainability side, and then also taking technology and using that to create better outcomes. But outside of climate, I mean, there's so much going on in this industry, and we're going to hear a bit later today. I think we have a speaker from Nigeria talking about the role of technology in Africa. Technology in emerging and frontier markets is playing a huge role in terms of access to work, education, things like, you know, transitioning from wood and coal-burning stoves to clean cook stoves. Gender equality, you know, it was funny, when we were sitting over there, I was looking around and I was like, oh wow, it's a tech conference and we don't see a lot of women in these conferences, even today, but the role of technology and how technology is allowing women to stay in the workforce longer, right? COVID proved that for everybody. And now we're starting to see companies with this hybrid schedule is allowing women to stay in the workforce longer. So, you know, technology is really playing a role across sustainability, not just on the climate side, but also on the social side.
Well, that's great news. So it's not all ChatGPT to write poems and
Well, that's the
new jokes.
concern,
It's
right?
actually useful.
We had, what was it? ChatGPT kind of took the likeness of Kendrick Lamar, and so there was like a whole copyright issue too. So the flip side of technology is, what are the things we need to watch out for from a sustainability angle?
Can you expand on that? I think we're hearing, obviously, higher compute costs, energy requirements. Are there other areas that people should watch out for?
And I think that's a great opportunity, right? So the higher energy cost that's associated with blockchain technology, with the use of AI, that's an area for innovation, ripe for innovation. And we're starting to see now companies starting up that are using blockchain also in terms of mining, right? So a lot of what's needed for sustainable development on the climate side is lithium, is cobalt, is steel, are natural resources. And so how could you use blockchain technology to essentially monitor your supply chain and understand that you're getting these raw minerals from places that have fair labor practices, as an example.
And Peter, where are you seeing both opportunity in a decade, but also challenge? Like, what's your view of it?
Well, I think from a sort of macro perspective, the biggest overall opportunity is how AI and other related technologies can impact positively productivity. Productivity is the sort of crucial component of economic growth and prosperity, alongside things like population growth, which is moving in the opposite direction. So if we really want to grow our economies and grow real incomes, then productivity is the key, and technology is a potential conduit to realize that ambition. That being said, you know, people had this expectation and hope around the internet, and here we are, you know, 20, 25 years after its sort of full commercialization, and there's very little evidence of aggregate productivity enhancements. And we don't have time to go through all the reasons for that. I think I'd be much more hopeful with applications around AI, and the work that we've done, and some academics as well, would suggest that actually the displacement opportunity of things like AI in terms of improving efficiencies in businesses outside of the technology industry is very, very scalable. And we think it could boost productivity by 1.5% per year over the next decade or decade and a half. That is very, very, very significant if we get even close to that. What is interesting from an investment perspective is that the focus right now, as often is the case early on in investment in technologies, is on the companies that are doing the innovation or enabling the innovation, what we call the pioneers or the enablers. And we have what we call a Pearl framework: pioneers, enablers, adapters, reformers, and laggards. And it's often the adapters, the companies that can utilize these technologies to really transform businesses and business models to become very efficient, that the market finds very hard to really differentiate and focus on. And indeed, when we look at the potential across different industries for that kind of adaptation of innovation, the market is really underpricing that opportunity. And that's the big upside, I think.
Completely agree. So I'm sure in all our organizations, we're adopting AI internally. And one of the ways I think about it with our team is it's democratization. In the beginning, you know, 20 years ago, if you're in a corporate and you wanted to get some new tech, software or whatever to slightly improve a process, it was an utter nightmare. You had to make a case and go to purchasing and IT, and then at the end you had to rely on some people with some coding skills who were nothing to do with the front line. Now we can go to our teams and say, I'd like X to do Y because I want to cut half the time on analysis, for example. And we can do that. I cite the fact that I'm not musical and I'm not technical, but I've created a music video that even my kids have said is all right, Dad, using AI. We can do this in our organisations. How are you seeing the adoption in your own organisations of that democratisation of tech adoption? Do you think that's going to power transformation over the next decade? I've thrown them a curveball. I didn't put this in the prep.
Well, yes. I mean, in terms of our own adoption, we've already found that there's been quite a big improvement in productivity in the technology space itself, in our engineering teams, which is among the largest part of actually our global business in terms of numbers of people. There's been quite a big improvement in productivity. We're at the very early stages of working out how to apply these tools and related ones in other parts of the business, and there are problems. I mean, we should be clear. There are issues of privacy, of legal and compliance related issues, which we shouldn't forget was true of things around the internet and other technologies. Democratization, of course, was one of the great hopes of the internet, and in some sense that has been very true, but it's brought with it lots of things that were not anticipated, which has indeed in many businesses resulted in a huge growth of lawyers and compliance people and regulators and other things that didn't exist before. So there is a bit of a balance here. But overall, I think that there are many tasks that are time consuming that will be very easily supplanted by or improved by the technologies we have even now. And indeed, will displace people. Not everyone, but will at least change the roles that lots of people have.
Agreed.
And I think lots of other different types of roles will be created. So the people that worry about no jobs in the future, I think that's far too negative. But I think lots of jobs will change.
Agreed. How do you see the jobs changing in your world?
Yeah, I would echo some of that as well. I think it's still early days on figuring out how to apply specifically something like AI to large-scale global banking business where there are a lot of regulations and there are a lot of concerns around privacy and security. That said, I think that where it is starting to play a role is also data aggregation. So for portfolio managers, from that perspective, we're so used to looking at traditional measures of performance from companies and trying to make decisions on which company to invest in based on price to earnings or valuation, whatever it is that we're using in terms of making those decisions. But now taking in different types of data, take climate data, for example, that's gotten much better over the last couple of years, which I think is going to just kind of leap forward as we think the next 5-7 years in terms of what we're able to model and then how we're able to apply that to portfolio management. But that said, I do think that there are inefficiencies that could be addressed with things like AI if used responsibly. For those of you that might not be familiar, for every structured deal that we do, there are probably 300 to 500 pages of legal paperwork that go with that. And having the ability to quickly read through and analyze and have some output on that does save a significant amount of time, allowing a banker to perhaps do more of those types of analyses versus replacing that job altogether. So I think it might make efficiency better versus just taking out, certain roles.
Agreed. So I'd like to turn to where you personally think there might be the biggest opportunities in the next decade, either for tech in the workplace or in health or in sustainability or in personal. Just where do you see the opportunity?
Well, sorry.
Go ahead. No?
Well, let me just, to go back to that sort of framework that I mentioned, pioneers, enablers, adapters, reformers and laggards, and I won't go through examples of them right now, but I think really it's the adapters and the reformers broadly across many different industries that will probably see the biggest benefits of technologies. That means people who can, adapt their own businesses to become much more efficient, just in the way that we've been discussing. The reformers are really, if you like, disruptors, new companies often that come into an existing industry and completely change the structure of it by leveraging new technologies which have previously been absent. And we've seen that happening, of course, in many industries as a result of new entrants that utilized internet-based technologies in the last 20 years. And some of them have gone from startups to among the biggest companies in a little more than a decade. And I think that will happen again. It is also important to mention in that Pearl framework that I'm using, the laggards are really the losers. And it is also important to emphasize that historically, often losers are within the technology sector itself, because they get usurped and overtaken, leapfrogged, if you like, by new companies. And, you know, this doesn't always happen, but very often does happen. So I would say that, you know, I'd be looking for companies or industries that can adapt these technologies to become much more efficient, and really newer companies that are coming along and thinking about an existing industry and how it can be reshaped, and really being transformative and disruptive in doing so. I think lots of industries have, you know, huge potential to begin to utilize some of the technologies that are emerging at the moment. Healthcare, you mentioned, is a very exciting one, because, you know, the ability to just take huge amounts of data, analyzing it very, very quickly, can really improve the productivity in that industry and the outcomes. I think education as well. So those would be two that I'd be focused on.
Great. One sentence to wrap us up.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick here. Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity is really in emerging markets. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to democratize areas that we've kind of taken for granted. Education, I think, is a big one. If you look, there's a company in India, for example, that's using digitized education to give students access to very high quality education at very low cost. And that's going to change the game in terms of opportunity, in terms of economic growth. So I think that kind of emerging markets is really where I think there's a lot of exciting opportunity.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Harlan and Peter.
Thank you.